to the Monday Maplewood City Council special meeting. Today is August 29th. That is correct. Okay. 2022. There was a previous agenda that said Friday, but today is Monday. And that's the one we're going to go with. I will call the meeting to order. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. City Manager Coleman, would you do the roll call for us, please?
Certainly. Councilmember Cave?
Here.
Councilmember Juniman?
Here.
Councilmember Villavicencio?
Here.
Councilmember Knutson?
Here.
Mayor Abrams?
I am here as well. Thank you. We need a motion to approve the agenda that's not on here.
So moved.
Thank you.
Anytime.
Moved by Juniman, seconded by Knutson, the motion to approve the agenda. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. The motion passes.
And who seconded?
We have some unfinished business. That's why we're having a special meeting tonight. Let's see, City Manager Coleman, do you want to set this up for us? And then I know we need a motion. We'll be going into closed session.
So, Mayor, the purpose tonight is to update council members on the compensation study findings and to seek council direction, really just to loop you in on where we are and the steps that are remaining in this process. So before we close the meeting to go into closed session, the council must state on the record the specific grounds permitting the meeting to be closed and describe the subject to be discussed. Therefore, it is recommended that the council introduce the motion as written in your packet.
Would someone like to make that motion?
Pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.03, Subdivision B, I hereby move to close the regular meeting and go into closed session to share the results of the compensation study and seek council direction.
Second.
Moved by Juniman, seconded by Knutson. The motion pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.03, Subdivision B, to close the regular meeting and go into closed session to share the results of the compensation study and seek council direction. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes, and we will be going into closed session. session. And we are now moving on our agenda to the City Council Budget Workshop number 2. Do we have to? Melinda, would you, City Manager Coleman, would you like to give a summary of our closed session meeting?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. The mayor and council, as well as HR Director Mike Darrow, Finance Director Ellie Paulseth, and Police Chief, Public Safety Director Beardeman, and myself all were in a closed session to discuss the compensation study findings. The council did give us some direction on how to approach the pay studies or the pay approach, and we are going to be working with the consultant on that, and we'll be bringing that back for council consideration in an upcoming meeting. And the meeting ended at 5:54. And so now we're starting a new meeting at 6.
Thank you. Let's see, Finance Director Paulseth, we can't wait to hear the budget workshop number 2.
Good evening, everyone. Is this thing on? Nice to be back in front of you again with this topic. We've got some exciting things to talk about tonight. I did want to mention in your packet, I know some of you really like to delve into the detail, and others of you would rather stand on your head and eat a bale of hay rather than read this stuff. So all of the detail for the budget proposal that we're talking about tonight is included in your packet if you are so inclined to like to walk through all of the narrative and the line items. I also want to mention, I forgot the last time, that Assistant Finance Director Joe Rube is here. He also helps with the budget, so he'll be here tonight as well. So I'll just get right into this, and we're going to try to move through the routine slides real quickly so that you have plenty of time for those questions. We'll review all of the strategies and goals that we talked about before, and I've got some peer comparisons for you tonight and some initial tax estimates and market values, so something different from the last time. Again, everything goes through our strategic plan. I think it's important to remember that financial and asset management in the context of the budget is probably the most important thing that we're talking about tonight, because it's what makes everything else go around. There are approximately 67 funds. Cities have fund accounting. We will primarily be talking about the general fund and the debt service funds when we talk about the tax levy. The rest of the funds are handled in a different manner, other revenue sources, including fees. So those are discussed, the fee schedule is discussed at a later date. So mostly the general fund. Some of the challenges that came up, some of the things that changed, we talked a little bit about this before. The general fund payroll increases, you all know, that's the big story about this year's budget, estimated at about 1.3 million right now. That's what we're estimating. Some other small increases. You see that at the bottom there was some decreases. There was a decrease in debt service that we were expecting. We talked about that for the last few years. We know that debt is falling off the books. We try to increase our capital levies at the same time that the debt levy decreases, so that we're not swallowing up the debt levy with operations. So there's an increase in the building fund, because at this point I think it's about 200 or 225,000 that we've been levying for the building fund, and it's just not enough to cover all of the buildings on all of our campuses. So we've been having a really hard time keeping up with building improvements and building maintenance. So that would be one of the things that you have to work with. We're moving some of that debt service into the building fund, moving it from a $225,000 levy to $300,000. That's always something that you can roll back if you want to start looking for cuts. The other thing I wanted to point out was the increase in contracted services. About half of that is folding the second social worker into the city budget. We have heard from Ramsey County that they will probably be paying for it in 2024. We know that that might not happen. We do have ARPA funds until 2024, but we have it in there anyway, so that also gives you some more room in case that you're looking for someplace when we get to these next few slides and talk about the impact. So a 6.3% is kind of what's being proposed tonight. That's a 1.5 million. Last year, if you recall, we were at about a 5%, and that was about 1.1 million. The general fund is the largest impact. As you can see, there was a reduction in the debt service funds offset by an increase in the capital project funds. So primarily the general fund with an 8.7% tax levy increase, almost 100%, or virtually all of it due to the projected wage increases. So how does that impact the taxpayer? So what we call the median value home, the county has determined what the median value home is. And in Maplewood, for 2023, the median value home is $313,400. Last year it was $268,300. So that's how much the value of the homes has increased. That's 16.8%. I want to make sure that you understand that the information that the county has provided us is very, very preliminary. They're working on it. They have a new tax system and they have new people and they're working very hard at it. I will say that they are, but we were able to get information in bits and pieces enough to kind of calculate a rough estimate. So it will change, but.
Ms. Paulseth, can I ask a question too? Sure. Has the county given any indication as to what their levy increase is going to be proposed?
Madam Mayor, they did not, but I will certainly ask.
I think that would be helpful. And, council members, in thinking about this, we're about between 30 and 35% of, what is collected in property taxes. And I just want to remind everyone, when we're looking at this, if you look at, well, it's only $100 or $123, that may not sound like it's a lot, but when you figure that, in looking at some of these homes, they're paying $5,000 and $6,000 in taxes. And so any increase is going to be a significant increase. And that's just what we're doing. That doesn't include Ramsey County. It doesn't include what I believe is an IT levy that is going to be coming from the school district and any of the other taxing authorities as well. So I think we all need to at least keep that in mind as we work through this. Councilmember Juniman has a question too.
Actually, I just have a comment. I agree with you to a point, but the flip side of that is we know what we are giving for our taxes, and it's almost every service they get in their home and on their streets. And we've already talked about this, but at some point, not only do we, but every taxpayer in Ramsey County, if they aren't sure what's going on with their taxes that are paid to the county, they need to ask. It's just that simple. I'm still one of those that says, so you finally came out of your coma and thought you should have an HRA levy of 11.4%. Thanks. We've been doing affordable housing for years without you. I mean, people should not just accept from any source something that goes way up. They should
These
call
are
the
just
county
real
commissioner.
numbers,
Yes.
though, so, yeah. And they will have an impact on people. Did someone else have anything that they wanted to say?
Just a comment that increases in home value don't convert to cash unless you sell your house or get some equity loan. So in spite of that, it's still real. This is still out of their pocket for the same house, same everything, so.
Right. And I think everyone saw in their property taxes the notices that everyone's property went up considerably in Ramsey County. And we're still all living in the same homes. So, go ahead.
Okay,
Thank
let
you.
me say while I am still on this slide, $123 is what the median home would increase under this proposal. The median home being the $313,000 home. Now, I have heard that homes are already dropping. We'll see what that does for next year. But that's an 11.1% increase approximately for the median home, and depending on which bracket you're in, it could be slightly more, slightly less. So I do want to say that of that $123, most of it, or a good portion of it, I should say, is due to the value increase in the home rather than the levy increase. So maybe if I state it this way, if the city's levy increased 0%, so you had the same levy as last year, there would be a $46 increase in the taxes that just related to the value. Now, the Met Council has increased, or I shouldn't say the Met Council, but the pool of fiscal disparities has been increased, and Maplewood has gained an additional $400,000 from that, and that is responsible for shaving off $9 per home on all of our taxpayers. So that brings it down to $36. The remainder of that then is due to the levy. So $123 would be what the 6.3%. That is the levy that we think is workable simply because we do have that added position, the social worker position. We can fund that with ARPA. We do have a little bit of flexibility built in. We'll move on to the next slide. What if we increased it to 7%? That brings it to 1.7 million increase rather than the 1.5. So with the 1.7, that results in 132, so another $11. So with 7% giving you that additional safety net, if you so desire. The thoughts that I was having tonight in our discussion was that the city does have some control over how we set up this pay plan, but we don't know how bargaining is going to go. Those contracts aren't settled. We don't know what we're going to have to do to settle them. So that would be the thing, to be thinking in the back of your mind is how much of a safety net do you want besides the things that we have already built in, especially, noting that there would be a new finance director that might take a while to get up to speed on some of these things. It's just a thought. We're throwing it out there. We think 6.3 will work, but if you want a little extra security, 7% will work as well. And 5% is probably not so workable. That would be really pinching it down to the wire. We got great reserves, so you could do it. You could do it, but with everything that we have on the plate, it probably wouldn't go there. But that would be $105 on the median home. I think we could do it without hurting our credit rating and without hurting the city's budget too bad. I would rather see that bumped up a little bit. So by fund, the general fund obviously is about 75% and 76% in 2023. The debt service fund's 18.9, so a little bit lesser share of that every year, and 4.9% for some of the other funds, which would be the capital project funds. Of the general fund revenues, over 76% is property taxes. So that's why it's very difficult to really do much. The revenue stream, the second highest revenue stream is generally, it used to be intergovernmental, but now it's licenses and permits. We're seeing a lot of building permit activity, which that's the other caveat. We just really, really would need a crystal ball to know what's going to happen next year. We've had 2 really huge years with building permits, and we really don't think that's going to continue into next year for a lot of different reasons. And it may be lower than what we've budgeted for. So we kind of have those things kind of covered, but it depends on how secure you want to feel.
Councilmember Knudsen has a question.
Just a quick question. Kind of want to do a little place mark here. We look at percentage of general fund revenues. I noticed later on in the discussion, some of our other revenues are kind of flat. You got some graphs and some others. So I just wondered, I just want to mark that point for later discussion about what that trend line is for.
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The expenditures almost every year we see over 50% in public safety in the general fund. A little bit higher next year, 57%. Last year it was 56%. Public Works comes in at close to 15%, and then general government at close to 15%. By category, Again, the reason why we can't really make any cuts without affecting people is wages and benefits are 76%, and contracted services almost 20%. And those contracted services are people as well. They're architects, engineers, lawyers, the kinds of consultants that we utilize. Commodities is 4%. It really doesn't move the needle at all to do much with commodities. Total expenditures would increase by about 7% under this budget, and that is primarily because we have calculated in 6% salary increases. So what the assumption is there is that there would be a 3% general adjustment or cost of living, and then a 3% step adjustment on every employee. Now, every employee might not get a step, and some employees might get more. So that's why we went with 6. With the uncertainty, it's really up to you guys. I am not the one, and we are not the ones that have to go out to the community and say, we are raising our levy 7% because employees in the city deserve a raise. We're not the ones that have to go out and tell people that. I know that's not a popular message, but that is primarily the reason that we're seeing, because of this pay equity situation, we're seeing that 6%, 7%. The good part of the story is that Maplewood has been conservative for as far back as I could find. We never had anything over 5%. And I'm sure at some point you did, but I think I went back 15 years, and the levy has gone anywhere from 0 to 5%. So this would be the first time going over 5%. Good news on the tax capacity, and again, very preliminary numbers, but an increase there of, got the number here. I will find it, but anyway, the tax capacity, it's on the next, it's on a slide that's coming up. So we did see a fairly significant increase in tax capacity. Unfortunately, not all of that is new construction. A lot of it was just inflation on the homes. So it's the new construction that really builds that extra tax base for you, that allows you to spread that levy across and bring savings to the taxpayers. So most of it was inflation. Again, we're seeing really nice rebound from the Great Recession, with average annual increase the past 10 years, 5.6% per year. The fiscal disparities distribution, average annual increase there is 5%. We saw another big increase this year, almost $400,000, I think it was. So again, as I said, that is a huge gift to the taxpayers. That increase, just the increase alone, saved taxpayers $9 per year. But overall, $3.6 million is what we get out of that pool, and we'll
Can you go back to that slide?
Yep.
I was looking at the rough numbers. I don't see the 400,000.
Okay, that's the difference.
I see about 150,000. I mean, I'm just ballparking it here, but a little between 3,447,368. Am I looking at that wrong?
She didn't.
No, you're not. It's just it's on a slide that's coming up.
Yeah.
So
it's
it's
151,000.
right. So it's
Okay.
4.3%. So I'm sorry, I had
Okay.
4 on my mind. 4.3%. So you're correct. That's
Okay, thank you.
so the fiscal disparities program. We've talked about this every time, but it bears repeating. So it started in the 1960s, and it was a regional approach to solving the infrastructure problems in the Twin Cities, so metro-wide. So what was happening was Minneapolis and St. Paul had all the commercial development and, therefore had all the money. And the suburbs still had to ramp up their infrastructure to manage that flow of traffic and people, but they didn't have any money to do it. So the Metropolitan Council implemented this program to cost share the proceeds of that from the Minneapolis and St. Paul and the larger cities like Bloomington and Edina and Eagan. Maplewood gains from this pool, so Maplewood pays into the pool. All of the commercial industrial property values get pooled from in the metropolitan area, and then they get distributed out based upon a formula. So Maplewood is one that gains. If you're a city of Bloomington, you're paying into the pool, and it's a net loss for you. Maplewood gains from the program because Maplewood doesn't have as much commercial development as some of the larger cities. So Maplewood gains, and that's 3.6 million. There's your number on the slide. Mayor Abrams, 151,000 increase from last year. So it's a very nice. You don't ever want to lose your fiscal disparities that way. So because of these things, because of the fiscal disparities increase, because the levy is, moderate, it was an increase, but it's still moderate, and because there was an increase in the values, all of those things go together to make up the tax rate. So the tax rate will decline significantly in 2023 from 43 to 40%, and that has pretty much been on a steady trend. Last year, it went up because of the fire hall. We did say that was going to happen for 1 year, and then we were going to go back down again. And so we're down below what we were in 2021. So we still expect to see that, even though these numbers are just preliminary. We're going to see the tax rate. That's a good sign, and the trend is there, so that it's been the average annual decrease over 10 years has been almost 2%.
Councilmember Knudsen has a question.
This is a little bit rhetorical for those that are listening. This next slide on the tax rate calculation factors. Now, I put on my notes here, this is really good.
It's really good.
Am I right?
Yeah.
And tell me why.
Well, it tells a story. So it tells you that the city has, in some years, most years, increased its tax levy, but not every year. On average, over 10 years, if you averaged it all out, 3.43% per year. That would be an average of the increases for each year over the 10-year period. But the tax capacity has increased 5.61%, and that means the council didn't take advantage of that entire increase. For one, knowing that it wasn't all new construction, some of it was inflation on homes, so you gave some back to the taxpayers. But that's value and
theoretically, we could have stayed with the 5.61 and been still good.
Still good, yeah. Fiscal disparities is really good news, about 5% per year increase there, and that resulted in a tax rate that has continually gone down, almost 2% per year over the 10-year period. So it continues to trend down. It's good news. Despite the fact that people are going to see an increase in their taxes. And the reason they are primarily is because there's been a lot of shift onto the homeowners because of the inflation in the homes. So this is a funny slide to kind of understand, but this is a picture of what the tax increases and decreases look like for the last 10 years. So in 2014, there was actually a decrease on the median home of 4%. Next year, it went, up to 16. I don't remember exactly what happened that year, but then trended back down again. And a lot of this follows the values, the market values, and the shift to residential property as opposed to commercial. So it really creates a lot of chaos and volatility for taxpayers. So you can understand why it's frustrating for them. You're doing your part by keeping the levy steady. They're still seeing this, so you can understand why. So just a little bit of background to kind of paint a picture of where we're at financially. Over the last couple of years during COVID-19, we saw some unprecedented money coming in from the federal government. I wouldn't feel bad about that. We haven't seen money from the federal government since the mid-'80s. It was called federal revenue sharing. Were you around when? Anyway, it was phased out in the Reagan years, and we haven't seen it since. But the city of Maplewood, I don't know how much you would have probably received. It might have been $500,000, I'm just guessing, taking a stab at that based on what I received in some other agencies at that time. But so it's been a while since the federal government has sent a lot of money our way. So we received $3 million in 2020, and that was the CARES funding. Some of that went to the YMCA, some of it went to businesses. And those two last lines, wages and benefits of $2 million and COVID leaves of absence, basically covering for all of the COVID absences that employees experienced. Those basically stayed in the fund balance. The city had those things budgeted, so the budgeted portion, basically stayed in the general fund, and we had a surplus of over $2 million that year. Then we got the ARPA funding the next year, $4.4 million, and actually that came in over 2 years, but it was all recognized in the year 2021. That was set aside for some equipment, for the most part, and the YMCA. The last two items, the premium pay, it also paid for some premium pay. And we set aside some for the social worker. That last item, the COVID response, that kind of, was budgeted for, so it kind of fell back into fund balance. But for the most part, that money was spent. So what happened then is at the end of 12/31/2021, we had $6.1 million in surplus. So when I say surplus, I meant over and above the maximum of, we plan for 35 to 50% of our total expenditures, and that's because we don't get tax money for the first 6 months of the year. We need to have money to pay the bills, so 50% of the year's taxes is the maximum that we would expect to hold in fund balance, so that we have enough money to pay the bills. The reason that it wouldn't be any higher than that is because the taxpayers tend to wonder then why you have so much money in fund balance. So 50% is kind of what's been justifiable under our policy because you don't get taxes for 6 months. So you have to have at least that much. So having said that, we had $6.1 million over and above that. We have to subtract the $2.2 million for the ARPA funding for 2022 because we had already set that aside for the ladder truck and the fire truck and the other items. In January, the City Council allocated $1.5 million of the surplus from the year before, leaving an additional $2.5 million that has yet to be allocated. So what you allocated in, just as a reminder, what you allocated in January of 2022 from the 2020 surplus, we shored up the employee benefits fund because we had a lot of police officers retiring that year, longtime police officers that brought the fund down a little bit. The building fund, the public safety equipment fund, the fleet fund, and the EDA fund. That was $1.5 million that was allocated. That was shown at the bottom here. After that, there was still $2.5 million left. We would expect to see a surplus this year, depending on what happens with negotiations for the rest of the year on some of these pay items that are still outstanding. So that would go on top of that. So $2.5 million, and earlier in a session this year, we talked about allocating $1.5 million more. We set that aside until after the budget talks to make sure that there was enough money for the budget. So these are the items we talked about, $500,000 for the park fund, so that we wouldn't have to borrow money for the park project that I'm not remembering the name of the park right now, but Goodview maybe, Goodrich maybe. And then the building fund, again, technology fund, that will help pay for the ERP system, the fleet fund and the EDA fund. We talked about those things a little bit earlier. That would be another $1.5 million, still leaving about $1 million left. So that's a fair amount left, but inflation eats that up pretty quickly. A big year of petitions could eat that up. So that's $1 million over and above the 50%. So a good number, but it doesn't take long, a number of years for inflation to erode that. But you do have a lot of flexibility. You do have some room.
We have questions from 2 council members. Councilmember Cave was next, and then Councilmember Knutson.
Just one quick question, Ally. The technology fund, is that the software you're talking about for the finance department?
Yes.
Okay.
And it probably won't be 400,000. We scaled it down, and we're looking at just doing the core functions first. Maybe eventually it would be that much, but I believe it was around 250 or 3. Am I right? Something like that, yeah.
Thank you.
And then there's a question from Councilmember Knutson.
Okay, so starting out with 6, we got a 2.5, we spent 1.5. How much cash is left and where is it?
So basically, we're talking about only the surplus. The surplus started out at 6.8 million, 6.1 million, and so what is left now is 2.5. If you allocate another 1.5, that leaves 1. That's over and above the 50%, and that is like, I don't know, 20 million, something like that. That is, well, not quite 20 million, probably 12 to 13 million. That.
So at this point, how much is fungible? I mean, how much?
That entire 2.5 million. Is that your discretion?
Yeah. But in lieu of 2023 expenditures, how much could we use in lieu of?
You could use all of it. I wouldn't recommend
No.
spending, one-time revenues on operating, but you could do, what I'm saying is you have flexibility if we estimate too low. So when we're setting a budget, there's a lot of estimating because there's always missing information. We're doing our best to project. And so we try to have flexibility built in to the places where we think we need it the most. And one of the areas that provides the most flexibility is the fund balance. So what I would suggest is to set the levy at what you think you can justify and what you think will cover the bills. And if it doesn't, you do have this as a backup. You would like to spend it on other things, but you do have it.
I understand, thank you.
Yeah.
Can I go back a couple pages?
Sure. Do you have more questions?
I just, on this page 24, city tax increase and decrease history. Now, ultimately, that's just the way of distribution, right? I mean, it's not,
Yeah.
I mean, it's because of your home value goes up or down or whatever based on
Yeah.
this, then my portion of taxes could change.
Yeah,
But
variety.
the levy's the same, whatever we feel is appropriate.
Levy was nowhere, didn't look anything like this. Your levy chart was a very slow trend up. The property taxes are impacted by so many other factors. So in 2014, there was actually a 4% decrease in the median home. The next year, they saw a 16% increase. The next year, it was another 7% increase. So those increases add up,
So when you get your statement, you go, whose idea was this?
Yeah. Yeah, so
Thank
it's, I think, you expect a certain amount of inflation, but there are other factors, and one of the factors that can really impact is, and I don't remember what happened in 2015, but it could have been something with fiscal disparities, because occasionally the legislature will decide that, hey, we're going to hold the Mall of America out, and we're going to let Bloomington keep that this year, and they've done that. And then we, all the rest of the cities who would normally be gainers see a decrease. So sometimes that's what happens.
Thank you.
Councilmember Juniman has a question, too.
I think it would be fascinating to have an overlay graph
Yeah.
of the one he was just showing.
Yes.
Of the years where it was residential tax increase, business tax increase. Business tax increase, residential. It would be fun to do an overlay just to see how they coordinated.
And it does. It does. Okay, so you still have this proposal to think about, 1.5 million of the 2.5 that's currently in surplus. You still have that to think about, how much you want to keep for a safety net. What are other people doing? That's what we all want to know. So it's a little early. Some of the cities just didn't answer. They don't, but we will definitely get the information by the next meeting. We'll have it. I'll get it from the county. So Maplewood's still looking pretty good relative to some of the other Ramsey County cities. We also do a survey with other cities our size, like Golden Valley, and we're seeing a lot of 7%, 6.5 to 7. So we are seeing a lot in this area. It just seems that cities are trying to recover from COVID. They're being hit with inflation. They're trying to get programs back up and running, trying to start getting things up that have been put on the back burner since COVID. There's just a lot of different things that are playing into it. I would not pay too much attention to the ones on the high end. Those are really outliers. In some of those cases, it was because they maybe built a facility and there was a debt payment, or maybe it just was, wasn't the greatest planning, Also, there's a little bit of, like, for instance, Vadnais Heights expects that their council will probably reduce their levy some. Every city does it differently. We bring you a levy that we think is solid. We don't bring you something that you need to whittle down. So there are some of those things that are still going on out there. But the median in the Ramsey County cities that we have so far are 7, and the median from the other group. And I will definitely have these surveys completed by the next time because they will have to certify.
Ms. Paulseth, I thought I recalled seeing in the Pioneer Press that St. Paul adopted a 15% levy, and that was attributable to the way that they have to change their charging for roads, their assessments, and so we have here that it was 6.9%.
Yeah, so I remember the 15% being from last year, but did you just recently read it?
I just saw it.
Okay.
It was just in the Pioneer Press.
Okay.
So
And,
I don't think the
again,
6.9 is correct.
It's hard to say because things change in St. Paul pretty rapidly too, so
Well, they already voted it.
they did.
That's their
Okay.
max is 15%.
Okay.
So they've already taken that step.
And that's an important thing to remember is that they're voting on the max, and
Right.
it may not end up being.
Right, but
Yeah.
still, for our purposes, that's what, I think we need to look into that number because I don't think it's accurate.
I will
think-
verify it.
Okay, thanks. Because I
this-
believe I saw in the paper that they did vote a 15% levy increase, and I've actually talked to a St. Paul City Council member.
So this was, I had to get this online from their
Okay.
website, so it may have been outdated.
Okay,
But we'll definitely have a better picture of that next time. It's really hard when everybody's right in the middle of developing their budgets right now. So what would come next is if you need another workshop, there is time to have another one, but on September 12th is when you would typically adopt the preliminary levy because we have to certify it to the county by the end of the month. The preliminary levy cannot be increased, but it can be decreased. And then on December 12th, you'd adopt the final levy and the full budget and the financial policies, which we'll be bringing forth to you. So if any more questions or direction from the council, we would be happy to take that now.
council members, I'd like to find out what other information you would like from Ms. Paulseth. Right now, it's on our calendar for September 12th to adopt a preliminary levy. And then what more do you want to hear? Councilmember Knutson has a question, and then I'll ask each one of you.
I was just, back to that question I had, I'm looking at page, whoa, sorry, I got a sandwich in my glasses. Page 39, with those two graphs down at the bottom, there's the wages and benefits. Roughly is like three FTE increase, is that kind of the number? And the rest is on rate?
This is in our packet, it's not in your
Oh, in the packet, I'm
PowerPoint.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
Fire-
so that is another thing that I really neglected to bring up was, yes, there are 3 additional firefighters. We brought them in, or we're proposing to bring them in January, July, and December, so you're only seeing the impact of 1.5 So for 2023, and then you will see the remaining impact in 2024. It would just be another reason if you wanted to be more prepared for the 2024 budget and not really kind of be starting in a hole. It would be another reason to have more of a safety net in the levy. But yes, there are three new firefighters, and there was also a records clerk. That is also a position that may or may not, we have two of them now, and they're both in the budget. And that may not continue to be the case. There may only be one. There is one that is working, that has been on an extended leave. And so we don't really know how that's all going to play out. So there's a little bit of flexibility built in there too with that extra position. They may end up, the city manager may end up deciding that we need that person to stay. So we don't dare take it out. So, but there may be some flexibility there as well. It's just a lot of unknowns yet.
I have a general question that may be.
Go ahead. Do you have any?
Yeah, my general question is, in reading through the pages of good explanation, very well done. I'm just wondering, what is the percentage of benefits compared to total salaries? I mean, when I do forecasting for some of my organizations, I use 28 to 30%.
Yeah, I was going to say around 25 to 28.
Okay.
I don't have an exact number.
I mean, it just gives me a feel for
Sure.
where we stand. Then I'm looking at, I asked earlier, just as a placeholder, other revenue. In reading, it looks like some of them are flat, some of them are growing. The other sources we have other than the tax levy.
Mm-hmm.
Any, maybe city manager or something could say what's the trend line on our other revenue? Or-
City Manager Coleman.
Well, revenue, I think, is not going to be as good as it has been. We've had some record years in building permits, and part of that was driven by the school district's remodels.
Oh, sure.
And 3M has been very active over the last 5-6 years, but that we don't see that continuing. So where we get revenues is if we have commercial and industrial development primarily, and I don't see that trend is gonna continue. So we like to be on the conservative side of the revenue.
No, I get it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And council members, the intergovernmental revenue or the state revenues have remained pretty flat for decades, actually. There's been some increases, but relatively flat. So we don't see a lot of increases in our revenue stream other than property taxes. And I also wanted to mention that on the personnel side, as you were looking at that chart, we did have a little bit of flexibility built into the budget already, which helped us a lot. We had 2 positions in the GMV that we did not, they were funded through an ARPA grant. However, we had them built right into the budget. So we got the ARPA grant and saved the money just by building it right into the budget. So there's savings there from that in 2021, and we also then did not renew that relationship with those employees. They were employees that worked the lobby during COVID. So they were already built into the budget, so that was 2 whole positions, so over $200,000 that we were able to absorb some of these other costs with. So there's always those kinds of things that are very helpful when you're going into a new budget year to have that flexibility there for you. And that's kind of what we're trying to set up with the social worker position.
Councilmember Knudsen.
I'm just looking at a graph on page 47 of the detailed stuff. My questions aren't that hard-hitting. I just think it's kind of impressive when you look at this graph. We're kind of in the middle-of-the-road peer group relative to our spending, but what I like is this, the orange bar means we're investing. There's a capital investment. Yes, our debt is a little bit high, but we're dealing with that. You can see how it helped balance this year, the debt reduction plan, and expenditures are pretty well in line. So
So Mayor and Council, I put this on a slide, and because I kind of ran out of time, I decided I would put it on the Truth and Taxation because that's
Well,
normally
I'll
when I
help
do
out.
it. But I did include it here. But what I would point out from that is that the city's tax levy is about 101% of the average of this group. So, and the population is about 104% of the average. So very much in line, but the point that I want to make is the 2020 current expenditures. So 2020 just happens to be the last year that the Office of the State Auditor or the OSA has all of this data put together. So that's why it seems dated. But 2020 current expenditures is just another way of saying 2020 operating. And it's on a governmental funds basis, so not any enterprise funds included in it, but the governmental funds. So Maplewood at less than 80% of the average, so much lower spending, even though the tax levy is higher because of the debt, but from an operational standpoint, much lower spending than any of these population peers that we're looking at. That particular year, we had an extra street project, so there was more capital outlay being spent. And I would also point out that in that year, we had some refunding activity. So it looks like there's more debt service than there actually was. So that will straighten itself out next year, and you will actually see the debt service expenditures lower and the standing. So the outstanding bonded debt, looking at 60 million, you all know that we're down to about 55. And part of that was because of that refunding, that outstanding, so there's double debt included for some bonds that were refunded in February of 2021, but we were holding the money in escrow to refund those bonds, so we actually were holding 2 issuances. So you're going to see a significant reduction in next year's chart if someone produces it for you. And it'll look much better, but it has continued to improve even over last year, even though that refunding debt has been included in there.
Well, Ellie, I'm still excited.
Yeah, it's gonna, next year's chart will be a good chart.
Thank you.
You won't be here to see
won't
it.
be here
That's
to
just not fair.
Councilmember Juniman.
I also think it's interesting when you look at this chart, just for curiosity's sake, the one on page 47. If we had the old numbers from the census, we have done a lot more growing than some of our other suburbs that are our same size. So that means we have more services to deliver, and we have more diversity that we're trying to address correctly. And so I think that needs to be pointed out, because Roseville has barely, maybe they probably gained 10 people, and we were always compared to Roseville. And now it's a huge difference.
Quite a bit, yeah.
And likewise, we used to be compared to Richfield when we were closer together, and they're a lot less than we are now, too. So we're growing population-wise, where some of the other suburbs of previously like size or age are pretty static.
And even when you look at total expenditures, which includes capital and debt and operating, it's still only at 95.2. Because the operating is so low, so still lower than average of the group. So I think overall, a good story to tell, and in a year or two, the debt story is just going to be, it's just going to start flying off the pages, and you're going to really be able to see the fruits of the work that we've done over the years together.
Thank you. Good questions, council members. So in terms of what more you would like, because right now we are scheduled to set the levy September 12th at our meeting. So would you like another budget presentation number 3?
Please no. Please no. No, really the only thing, and it's really not that germane, I guess, but she said she was going to get the new numbers for the other places as the comparison. And if we could, get the information from Ramsey County that what we're seeing for residential values is accurate. Those are the 2 things that make a difference, especially the second one. Those are the only things that
I think updating too on what we know now that other cities are going to be doing as well, so that we can compare that. So it sounds to me like only comparisons. Is that correct? Councilmember Cave?
I had one more just to discuss. Is it something with the comp study that we're doing, do we have flexibility in our budget right now for the comp, the comp study we're doing with wages? Are we kind of set where we're at?
So Mayor and Council, I do anticipate that there will be a surplus for 2022. So it may be that this comp study gets completed in 2022, and some of those costs would be actually absorbed in 2022, depending on how the contracts
Yeah.
are negotiated. I'm not
will
really
wrap
in on
up.
that part of it, but
Okay.
I think that's a big possibility.
Okay.
City Manager Coleman, did you want to say something?
Yeah,
too?
I had a couple of comments. That there are, I think, 3 unions that have not settled for 22, so that'll help moving into 2023.
Okay.
So we'll be able to pay for some of those contracts yet this year. The other thing I would say is that Ellie has left us in a really strong position, and the ARPA funds, the CARES Fund, really helped position that, and you saw that tonight spelled out to you. The one thing that I would say is, I think the 6.3 is a really good number. Remember, we can't go up after the 12th, we can only go down. I think that positions us, we have a little bit of leeway. The one concern we don't know yet is tax petitions, and we never know those until the end of the year. I suspect that we're going to get hit pretty hard again on those, just because of the economy and inflation and everybody else, the downsizing that people are doing. So I'm a little bit worried about that, but otherwise I think we're in good position. Our healthcare premiums came in. If we go with Medicare, we'll be making that decision soon. Not Medicare, sorry. Medica, I always do that. It's 9%, and we had 15% put in the budget. So there's a little wiggle room there in terms of what we can do for our employees. So I think we're in a good, solid place. I would ask you if you think that we need to go down, that's a different discussion. We'd want some time to talk about that between now and the 12th. But if you think that's a comfortable number for us, I think that we can do a lot of good things with that number and make get our new firefighters, get our social worker scheduled in the budget. There's some really good things that we're going to be able to do with that. So I appreciate all the work that has been done by the staff and Ellie and her team. And also you guys, council members, thank you.
Council members, any comments on that? I would suggest that we focus in on the 6.3. And the next time, the presentation is more focused on just the comparisons. You don't have to repeat all of this again. I think, does that sound amenable to everybody? Okay.
Good.
So that kind of, yeah, that sets us up, I think, for the next meeting. And we'll have those latest, greatest numbers, and we'll see, the county's got to be talking about this. So I would really like to know what their plan is and what their percentage is going to be. So with that, council members, we have no new business, and we are concluded with our special meeting. Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.